Stop. Before you microwave that leftover rice tonight, I need to tell you something. You have probably heard a warning like this before. Never reheat rice. Never reheat spinach. Never microwave eggs. Maybe a friend forwarded you a message about it. Maybe your daughter told you to stop doing it years ago and you never really asked why. Here is the truth. Some of that warning is dead serious. It could genuinely put you in the hospital. And some of it is just an old kitchen myth that refuses to die, even though the science behind it stopped being true decades ago. Today, I am going to sort out exactly which is which, because getting this wrong in either direction can hurt you. Worrying about the wrong food wastes your energy. Ignoring the right one can make you sick. My name is Thomas Evans. For years, I have studied what happens to food after it leaves the stove, not the cooking itself, the part that happens next, sitting on your counter, going into your fridge, coming back out into your microwave. That after stage is where almost all the real risk hides, and almost nobody talks about it clearly. Today, we are looking at 4 foods that nearly every one of us reheats on a regular basis: rice, chicken, spinach, eggs. By the end of this video, you will know exactly which ones deserve your caution and which ones you can stop worrying about completely. Here is what I promise you by the end of this video. Number 1. I will tell you which food on this list has actually killed people, and I promise you, it is probably not the one you are thinking of right now. Number 2. I am going to bust a myth that has been scaring families around the dinner table for over 40 years for no good reason at all. Number 3. I am going to give you one simple number. Just one. A single temperature that protects you from almost everything we talk about today. Let's start with the one that is real, genuinely, seriously real. If I had to pick one food on this list to actually worry about, it would be rice. Not chicken, not eggs. Rice. Here is why. Raw rice naturally carries a tiny bacteria called Bacillus cereus. This has nothing to do with dirty rice or bad farming. It is simply how rice grows in the ground, all around the world. It is in nearly every bag of rice you have ever bought. When you cook rice, the heat kills most of that bacteria. Good, that part works exactly the way you would expect. But here is where the danger begins. Some of that bacteria can survive cooking in a different form, called a spore. Think of a spore like a tiny seed that is waiting for the right conditions to wake up. If cooked rice is left sitting out on your counter for too long, especially more than an hour or two, those spores can wake up. They multiply, and they produce a poison. Doctors call it cerulide. Here is the one rule that decides everything. The clock starts the moment your rice finishes cooking, not the moment you reheat it. If you get that rice into the fridge quickly, the spores stay asleep. Cold stops them cold, no pun intended. But if that rice sits out on the counter too long first, the spores wake up and make their poison long before you ever touch the microwave again. And this is the part that surprises almost everyone I explain this to. Once that poison exists, your microwave cannot undo it. You can reheat that rice as hot as you want, for as long as you want. The poison survives the heat completely, and it goes straight into your body. So remember it this way. Reheating rice is not the danger. Leaving rice out too long before it ever gets cold, that is the danger. Rice that goes into the fridge quickly and gets eaten within a day never gets the chance to build that poison in the first place. That is why it is perfectly safe to reheat. A few years ago, doctors in Belgium treated a college student who had cooked a large pot of pasta and left it sitting out on his counter for 5 days before eating it. He reheated it thoroughly. It looked completely normal. It smelled fine. Nothing about it seemed dangerous. Within hours, he became violently ill. The toxin had already built up to a level that overwhelmed his liver. Despite emergency medical care, doctors could not save him. I want to be clear. This is an extreme rare case. Most people who eat rice that has sat out too long simply get a very unpleasant stomach illness for a day, sometimes 2. But that story shows you something important. And I want you to carry this one simple rule with you. Fridge quickly, safe to reheat. Counter too long, dangerous no matter how you reheat it. That is the entire rule. Nothing more complicated than that. There is a second, smaller concern with rice that is worth mentioning briefly. When starchy foods like rice are cooked and reheated repeatedly at very high heat, they can form a substance called acrylamide. Government food safety agencies consider this a probable cancer risk over a lifetime of regular high exposure. It is a much smaller concern than the bacteria issue, and it mainly applies to rice that is fried at very high heat multiple times, not to a simple bowl reheated once in the microwave. Get your cooked rice into the refrigerator within 1 hour of cooking it. If you can, spread it out flat on a plate or shallow container first, rather than leaving it in a deep pot. A thinner layer cools faster, and faster cooling is exactly what stops those spores from waking up. Try to eat your leftover rice within 24 hours. The longer it sits, even in the fridge, the more chance bacteria has to slowly build up. And here is one rule that matters more than people realize. Only reheat rice one time. Do not reheat the same batch of rice today. Put the leftovers back in the fridge and reheat it again tomorrow. Each time food goes through that cycle of warm, then cold, then warm again, you are giving bacteria another opportunity. Follow those steps, and rice is perfectly safe to reheat and enjoy. Now here is where things get interesting. The food most people believe is the most dangerous one to reheat is actually the safest one on this entire list. Let me show you exactly where this myth came from, and why nearly everyone has been told it wrong. You have probably heard this warning before, maybe from your own mother, or her mother before her. Never reheat spinach. It turns poisonous the second time around. This warning is old, genuinely old, older than most of our refrigerators. It goes back to a time when kitchens did not have the reliable cold refrigeration we take for granted today. Back then, spinach that sat out on a warm stove or countertop for many hours really could grow dangerous bacteria, and the fear made complete sense for that era. Here is what is actually true about spinach. Spinach naturally contains a compound called nitrate. On its own, nitrate is not dangerous. In fact, it is part of why leafy greens are considered so good for your heart. Nitrate helps your blood vessels relax, which can support healthy blood pressure. The problem only begins if cooked spinach is left sitting at room temperature for a long stretch of time. Bacteria naturally present in the air can slowly convert some of that nitrate into something called nitrite. And if that spinach is left out for an extremely long time after that, on rare occasions, those nitrites can convert into a different compound that is not something you want in your body. But here is the honest, complete truth, and I want you to really hear this part. If you cook your spinach, move it into the refrigerator within about 2 hours, and eat it within a day or two, none of that chain of events has time to happen. A modern refrigerator slows that entire process down to almost nothing. This exact myth was actually challenged directly a few years ago by food safety researchers in Europe, who reviewed the original warning and found that it simply did not hold up for spinach that is stored properly in a modern fridge. The advice had been based on outdated information from a time before consistent refrigeration existed, and once researchers pushed back, health authorities updated their guidance. The one group that genuinely does need to be more careful with nitrates is infants and very young children whose bodies process nitrites differently than adults. If you are caring for a baby or a toddler, freshly prepared vegetables are always the safer choice. But for the rest of us, reheated spinach, stored properly in the fridge, is simply not something to lie awake worrying about. A quick story to bring this home. I once spoke with a woman who told me her own mother refused to eat leftover spinach for her entire life, nearly 70 years, because of a warning she was given as a young bride. When I explained the real science behind it, she laughed and said she wished she had known decades earlier because spinach was one of her favorite vegetables, and she had thrown away countless leftover servings out of fear that never needed to exist. What to actually do with spinach? Get cooked spinach into the refrigerator within about 2 hours of cooking it. When you reheat it, make sure it is heated fully through, not just warm around the edges. And the one real rule to follow is simple. Do not leave cooked spinach sitting out on the counter overnight. That is the actual danger, not the reheating itself. You can stop worrying about your spinach. Genuinely. Chicken works a little differently than rice or spinach. The real risk with reheated chicken is not some hidden switch flipping on inside your microwave. The real risk is something much simpler and honestly much more common: ordinary food poisoning caused by improper storage. Here is how it happens. When chicken sits in the refrigerator, bacteria can slowly begin to grow if the chicken was not cooled quickly enough right after cooking, or if it has simply been stored for too many days. Reheating chicken that has already gone bad does not undo that damage. The heat may kill the live bacteria, but just like we discussed with rice, certain toxins those bacteria left behind can survive the reheating process completely intact. There is also a second, smaller issue that is worth understanding because it gets confused online constantly. When any meat, including chicken, is cooked at very high heat, such as grilling directly over an open flame or pan-frying at high temperature, it can form compounds that researchers have studied extensively. Government cancer research agencies have found that regular, long-term exposure to these compounds may be linked to increased cancer risk over a lifetime. But here is the important distinction that gets lost in most of the scary videos you have probably seen online. This risk comes almost entirely from how the chicken was originally cooked, meaning the temperature and method used the very first time you prepared it. It does not come from simply reheating leftovers gently in your microwave or oven the next day. Those are two completely different things, and treating them as the same thing is exactly the kind of confusion I want to clear up for you today. A practical example. Think about chicken that was grilled directly over hot flames until it developed a heavily charred, blackened crust. That original cooking method is where most of those compounds form. Reheating a piece of that same chicken later in a microwave does not meaningfully add to that risk. The moment that matters most already happened at the grill, not at your kitchen counter the next evening. What to actually do with chicken? Get your cooked chicken into the refrigerator within 2 hours of cooking it. Try to eat your leftovers within 3 to 4 days at the most. When you reheat it, make sure it is steaming hot all the way through the center, not just warm on the surface, since uneven reheating is one of the most common reasons bacteria can survive. And if you want to reduce your overall exposure to those high heat compounds in the first place, consider baking or slow roasting your chicken more often than charring it over an open flame. That single change at the original cooking stage matters far more than anything you do when reheating leftovers. Now, food number 4. And I promise you, this is the one that will genuinely catch you off guard, because the real danger here has nothing to do with cancer at all. It is something far more immediate and honestly a little more dramatic. Never microwave a whole hard-boiled egg with the shell removed. Here is exactly why. An egg naturally holds a good amount of moisture, sealed tightly inside the firm white and the yolk. When you place that egg in a microwave, that trapped moisture heats up extremely fast and turns into steam. That steam has nowhere to escape. Pressure builds up quickly inside that small sealed shape, and when the pressure builds high enough, the egg can literally burst. This is not some rare internet exaggeration. Chefs, dietitians, and food safety experts warn about this constantly because it happens in real kitchens on a regular basis, sometimes inside the microwave itself, sometimes the moment someone bites into it right after reheating, which can be genuinely startling and even a little dangerous if it happens near your face. The encouraging news is that scrambled eggs and fried eggs behave completely differently. They reheat perfectly well in short bursts in the microwave, especially if you stir them gently in between each round of heating. It is really only the whole, unpeeled, hard-boiled egg that deserves your caution. What to actually do with eggs? Never place a whole peeled or unpeeled hard-boiled egg directly into the microwave. If you want to warm one up, slice it in half first to release any pressure, or simply place it in a bowl of hot water for a few minutes instead, which warms it gently and safely. For scrambled or fried eggs, reheat them in short 15 to 20-second bursts, stirring in between each round. This spreads the heat evenly and gives you a much better result than one long blast of heat, which tends to make eggs rubbery anyway. So here is my question for you today. Which one of these four surprised you the most? Was it rice, turning out to be far more serious than you expected? Or was it spinach, turning out to be far safer than you were always told growing up? And if your mother or your grandmother ever warned you never to reheat spinach, I would genuinely love to hear that story in the comments below. Something tells me a lot of us grew up hearing the exact same warning, passed down the exact same way for the exact same reason. Before we close today, here is that one number I promised you at the very beginning: 165 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the safe reheating temperature recommended by federal food safety guidelines for leftovers of nearly any kind. If your food is steaming hot all the way through, not just warm on the surface, you have already covered almost every single risk we discussed today for every food on this list except, of course, that exploding hard-boiled egg. One number, one simple habit to check for. That is genuinely most of what you need to carry with you after watching this video. I know there is an overwhelming amount of frightening information out there when it comes to food. Messages get forwarded from one phone to another. Warnings get repeated so many times over the years that they start to feel like solid, established fact, even when the science behind them quietly changed a long time ago. My goal today was never to frighten you further. My goal was to give you the real, complete story so that you can finally stop worrying about the things that genuinely do not matter, and instead pay close attention to the one or two things that truly do. If someone in your life still believes that old spinach warning or has never heard the real story about rice, please consider sending them this video. It takes about 10 seconds of your time, and it might genuinely save someone you care about a very bad night in the hospital or worse. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I will see you in the next video.